Our journey through Mira has come to a conclusion, and my friends, my fellow Blade members, I have one question for you. How's it poppin'? Hey everyone, it's Yggdrasiel, and it is my delight to finally be back after such a long time. I am very sorry for the delay in content, but between playing not only through the game and its epilogue content, but also suffering, unfortunately, through being sick every other week to the point where my voice was gone for about 4 or 5 days. Finally, it has returned, and I am here to discuss my thoughts regarding Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, as well as its epilogue content. Now, of course, this will be very spoiler sensitive. If you have not played through the epilogue yourself, please, I encourage you, turn off the video and come back another time when you have gone through the content. The video will still be here, believe me. Now, as always, if you enjoy what I have to say, please feel free to give this video a like, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe for more Xenoblade Chronicles, Monolith Soft, and Nintendo content. And with that out of the way, we got a heck of a lot to discuss, so let's get stuck in. Now, first off, this is not going to be one of my concise videos as usual. I am not using a script for the most part, so please forgive me if I tend to ramble or go back and forth on one subject or another. Let's quickly go over my thoughts on the Definitive Edition as a whole. What a massive improvement. Absolutely. Through combat, through utility, through quality of life, it is a joy in and of itself to be playing this game at any point throughout. Between quick recast as well as, again, the utility that this game provides, better knowledge overall. I mean, it's been a decade since I've been on Mira, nearly a decade or so. The fact that, we have content creators like NL and JB Spearfreak who've been providing excellent guides, one of which I used. It was NL's Amdusius grind at level 30 to really let me get a bunch of class points to be so thoroughly prepared in just preparing and bypassing these level requirements as well. Honestly, it turned my 95-hour journey, my first time around, into a more concise and well-experienced 55 to 60-hour journey. Obviously, that's just for the main story alone, not for many of the side quests that I've ignored in my pursuit of trying to reach Chapter 13 at an appropriate pace. That being said, I did go out and I unlocked all of the characters, save for our lovely gal, Mia, who I will gladly be trying for in a little bit. But I digress. Let's move on to the new content, namely Chapter 13. And I can finally see why many people are coming out of it with a very mixed reaction. But as a player who's waited to see the resolution of many of these in-game threads, we did get to have a very nice explanation or preamble or many of these while leaving some loose connections. In fact, my biggest pain point overall with Chapter 13 is mainly its pacing and how it chooses to express its narrative or how it expresses these plot points. I'll get to that in a little bit. Now, its 3 acts are fairly straightforward on paper. 13 Act 1 is the introduction of the DMAT events, a little bit of explanation on the ghosts, and of course bringing in not only the Ares, not only the return of Vita and our new antagonist Void, but also our hero of the hour, humanity's hero, Mr. Alois Bernalt, and what a joy that this man is to see on screen. I swear to you all, he made me buy pizza, not only in-game, but IRL as well. That is how charming an individual and character he is, and I truly look forward and hope that we see him in future titles as well. With Act 2 then, we get a lot of explanation that I am, again, not a big fan of in the way that it's presented. I'm not the biggest fan of Al just going, oh hey, while I was so-and-so, I just made me remember this little bit, and then 5 minutes later, oh, I made me remember this other little bit of what happened while I was away. And, just the constant, intermission in between his explanations was not overall appreciated. It made me feel like, were Al not the person that he was, I'd have a hard time to believe many of these explanations myself. That kind of feeling. But of course, we take him word for word. as does everyone else, with the idea that Mira is just, completely lost. We need to sort of get this evacuation plan. We got to have an Exodus Day. We got to have a White Whale 2.0. And everyone's just on board with it. And I know Act 2 is meant to try and show some of the people's opinions or their thoughts, but I'm sorry. For supposedly the weeks that Chapter 13 takes place throughout, I still feel that the pacing was a bit too rushed for the severity of what's actually occurring. I understand there's a use of man-on tech. I completely get that, as well as other alien technology to just sort of help acclimate everything moving along in this sort of rushed environment. I don't know. The pacing of Chapter 13 is what irks me the most, not the story in and of itself, nor its explanations. I just want to put that on airs. Completely fine with the story, the pacing, and how it chooses to present its pinpoints and exposition, I have a bit of a gripe with. But now then, so let's try to discuss topics at their core. So instead of just, trying to relay and discuss them as they appear throughout the story, let's just talk about each of the element on its own. So let's begin with the dematerialization events and the ghosts themselves. I gotta say, I do like that they continue to appear as the parallel equivalent of the Gnosis in Xenosaga for the realm of Xenoblade. That being said, of course, it remains to be seen if they just dematerialize people into salt or into dust, because again, they're targeting mimeosomes, but more specifically, I feel as if they are targeting individuals that carry the essence of soul or of spirit, or at the very least are sentient. Note that they do not target any form of nature, nor does nature freak out in response to either seeing the ghosts or the dematerialization rifts. In fact, in a lot of the cutscenes, you can see nature just not minding its business whatsoever. And this is a very clear juxtaposition, mind you. When humanity crashed on Mira, again, according to the short stories and with everything that we've experienced, we've riled up so much of the wildlife. They are abhorred by our presence, especially in the early days, many of them freaking out in the streets of NLA themselves, while Nagi and Vandam and Maurice and everyone else worked to try and secure their foothold of NLA. Nature was just on a rampage. So to see not even a single ounce of energy being directed in freaking out towards the dematerialization events or for the ghosts themselves, it makes me feel as if nature simply on a fundamental level is not abhorred or does not interfere with the presence of the ghosts, much as the ghosts don't interfere with the natural order itself. And of course, there's other things to suggest that the ghosts themselves seem to follow some universal prognosis, that is, when something is abusive of the Conduit's power, again, and something else we will gladly discuss, but when humans or any sort of sentient being with a spirit or soul attempts to tap into the powers of the divine, they sort of let us, experiment a little bit with it, but when we truly try to tap in beyond our understanding of the powers of the Conduit, of the powers of the Rift, that's when the ghosts are like, okay, no, you've been warned, we sent in some fog, which, we do get a presence of plenty of fog in this, especially in Volataris. But when things go out of hand, when we step too far, when humanity puts on its clay wings and tries to soar towards the sun a little bit too hard and too fast, that's when the ghosts step in, and that's when they say, rather than let you try and experiment, we will rather just destroy this universe. And that's exactly what the ghosts seem to do. That being said, it does not appear that dematerialization is their immediate call either. We see that a little bit in Samar, and we see that also in the destruction of Earth, because Earth didn't really have, as far as we could see from the cutscenes, any dematerialization events. We rather see them sort of blow up the Earth entirely, or rather its whole universe, in just one single stroke. So there are different methods that the ghosts respond with, dematerialization seemingly being their be-all, end-all. It's also very apparent and very clear that I feel we will be seeing ghosts return later on. They are very clearly a force that is not our main opposing unit. They are not our primary antagonist this time around. That belongs to Void. That being said, the ghosts are clearly demonstrating their power on a near cosmic scale, so to say. But we don't target or attempt to target any sort of facet of the ghosts aside from simply acknowledging that this universe is going to be utterly dematerialized. We need to move on to another universe. So ghosts will certainly return at some point in one form or another in a future Xenoblade entry. They are just showing off their capabilities and what they're capable of in this game. Of course, that being said, they need something, they need a reason to be active to the point of total universal collapse, and we get that with the Samarian exposition. That it was Void back then at that time, aeons upon aeons ago, before anything was remotely set up. There were still the Samarians, as there was still a Conduit. Notably different. I know it's purple versus yellow. I think that is mostly just to highlight the fact that, there's not just a single Conduit, but one of many. And my mind races back to the concept art found in Xenoblade 3's artwork depicting a sort of multiverse or a sort of rift with multiple conduits existing at once. And again, we do finally have a little bit of clarification for that as well. So a lot of Xenoblade 3 lore going on to be explained or even added onto in Xenoblade X, which makes me think, Takahashi, what are you plotting, my friend? Because there's other things in that book too that need to come to fruition as well, and we are starting to see some of that happen with the conclusion of Xenoblade X. But I digress. I'm moving on a little too far. Returning to Samar, returning to Void, tapping into the Conduit, showing that the Conduit is sort of this gateway into this realm, this reality, or should I say this rift, where all confluences of every parallel universe in the entirety of Xenoblade, perhaps even Xenosaga, maybe even, if I'm huffing enough copium, maybe even Xenogears itself, there is a rift where all spirits, all collective unconsciousnesses converge onto one another at the end of their physical life, their material life, into an immaterial realm where sentience and love for life and the spirit of sentience all converges upon one another. And this is the rift. This is where the conduits ultimately pull energy from. Again, conduits are being discussed as a gateway to all other universes, but at the same point, it is that central area, this central confluence, where all of this stored power, including the sentience of the humans that created mimeosomes, inadvertently tapping into this primordial energy within the rift, because it turns out this rift is, where our spirit, where the human spirit and our consciousness has been stored. In creating mimeosomes, we inadvertently access this plane, as Void calls it, by sheer coincidence, or is it something more? Regardless, the choice to present the rift as it was, the concise choice to show the worlds of Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 is a very upfront way to show that, hey, in some way, shape, or form, these worlds will be connected, these universes will be connected, and many of them will follow upon the same rules and principles, all converging together at this location, at this rift. So I am even more in agreement upon seeing Takahashi's words that, the characters and the worlds of Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 have completed their journey in, the arc, the sagas of Xenoblade Chronicles. That section has concluded because Xenoblade X has revealed in this rift that universe's story has come to a close. It has done its job. its people's emotions, its spirit, its their love, their soul, their energy, all of that has been converted to the rift. And I would hope that many of these events happen hand in hand. Again, Void himself stirring because of a ripple from some other universe, most likely being a ripple of energy when Klaus began his experiment in Xenoblade 1 all that time ago. Well, Klaus, it seems your actions have even more consequences than we even thought of back in the day as well, because it's most likely Klaus is interfering with the Conduit on his end of that universe, most likely sending a ripple throughout the rift into the universe that which Void existed in. And again, just because the Conduit is a gateway, I would like to remind you that Klaus's experiment flung a myriad of things across many parallel universes. That is to say that Klaus's story may simply still not end, depending on what was thrown into other universes. And that ripple of power, of course, influencing the events of what would happen in Xenoblade Chronicles X with Void's awakening after his tampering with the conduits in trying to establish these myriad of cores that were essentially feeding off the power coming from the rift, or able to interact with the energy of the rift. In fact, perhaps these cores serving as miniature conduits themselves based off of the principles of the original primordial conduits. Again, there's still some explanation to see, but again, tapping into primordial energy, trying to reach towards the divine, that is a no-no that the ghosts cannot abide, and as such, they unleash devastation upon the Samarians. Not a dematerialization event as far as we know, at the very least from the beautiful cutscenes that we got to see during the explanations, but regardless, it was enough to damage and deeply scar the ancient Samarians to the point where they scrapped the Ares, or rather I should say they probably in all likelihood chose to strip it of its current progress, not realizing that, well, we can't exactly destroy these cores for whatever reason, so let's go and find some random backwater planet and let's just bury it. Which again, for Xenogears references, as far as I know, many of the gears, whether that is essentially the equivalent of skells in that game, are from excavation. You dig them up, as far as I'm aware in that world's lore. But again, straying a little too far, back to Samar. And even then, in the face of this cosmic universal transgression that brought in the ghosts, even then, ancient Samarians dared not to kill one of their kind. The concept of death literally being anathemic to them. That is, the fact that they abhor the idea of death. So these long-lived, seemingly immortal beings, as far as we could tell, chose to, instead of, killing Void outright, would rather imprison him. So they construct this Volataris, this massive gargantuan prison, and create these 6 spears to keep Void in a mental stagnation, death of the mind. And it's, again, playing into the idea that many of the villains in the Xenoblade series are not inherently evil, but it's rather a matter of their circumstances that defines their role as the antagonist. In Void's case, he is simply a being that tried to fly too close to the sun, such as our dear Professor Klaus. In doing so for his transgressions, he was subject to mental stagnation to the point where, as a deathless being, he sat essentially pondering what is death. And with all other knowledge, with all other parts and faculties of his mind being brought to heel, the fixation around death becoming his sole motive to escape death, but also curious as to what it could be. This sort of inner turmoil turning him into an entity, essentially, a primordial entity, by that which he inflicts death upon others so that he may never know death himself. Now, to all of you hearing this, by the way, I just want to point out some people have said this is somehow a worse story than Future Connected. I'm sorry, does Gelgar have a story like this? Alright, let's get back to it. There's also the matter of Lau's resolution to discuss, and to be honest, I'm mostly okay with this. Again, it's more or less how it was brought up as a point of Al's sort of random debacles while we're doing all these chores of just being like, oh yeah, and by the way, while I was also like on my way back, like I sort of entered Nirvana or like a state of Nirvana, and I just met Lau there, and I forgot to mention that while we were talking about pizza and the Rift earlier, so sorry about that. So, not the biggest fan of how it brought up. That being said, Lau's resolution was okay. Because, I mean, if you think about it, and I had to think about this for a while myself, realistically, if he returned, most likely he would not be able to pair up with NLA. He would be a former Blade member. He's a ex-member who essentially still tried to rat out humanity. Like what? He comes back and we lock him up in irons. That would be the case. Either that or he'd have to belong to some sort of rogue faction, like a new rogue faction, or it just becomes his own lone wolf character and we sort of don't hear much of him again. I feel that this was a much more satisfying end in the way it occurred. I don't think it's going to be the most satisfying conclusion for a lot of people because, especially as a veteran like myself, we were waiting nearly 10 years to see why he was naked on a beach with someone looking right at him, so it's okay. That's what I'll say. I do like that they had him return for the concluding events in 13 Act 3. I thought that was more than fine. It was fitting. It sort of brought this idea of even in the collective unconsciousness, certain souls can reach out and touch upon the lives of the people that are interacting with it. I thought that was fine and fair, and again, fitting for what Act 3 entails. So we've discussed a little bit of Samar, a little bit about the rifts, a little bit about the ghosts. Let's move on to the Ares then next. Again, being empowered by the Conduit itself, it is an affront to the cosmic order that which the ghosts abide by, and thus, so long as the Ares exists in humanity's hands, the ghosts will always seek them out, even towards whole other universes. But what exactly is the Ares itself? I mean, Samar ordered its destruction, but yet it could not be destroyed and was seemingly discarded on a random planet that which became Elma's home world as descendants of Samar. What's more, upon comparing the cores of the Ares to the cores present upon the ghosts, as well as the cores that are represented on the Ouroboros of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, as well as the design of Origin, mind you, there's very clearly something that is going to be going on with this design going forward. And it also makes sense of why the Ouroboros of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 don't have nearly as many cores as the Ares itself. Note that no ghosts appear in the universe of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, time being stopped in that world for one instant, but also the fact of the matter is there's simply not enough power in this parallel universe in a flicker of time that is going on to be attracting nearly as much as power and attention as the Ares does in its universe. It is the power of two souls, two people within Ouroboros, that try to access the souls, the spirit, the unconscious that moves within Origin, as opposed to the power of the Ares, which is linked to the Conduit, which is linked to this rift between worlds where all collective unconsciousnesses, where all spirits, where all traces of love, of the soul is endowed upon. And that in near infinite power is what allows the Ares to persist for so long, to endure, that it can't be destroyed, that it persists even deep within the earth of Elma's homeworld up until the point where it's reconstructed, up to the point where Earth can modify it, and no matter how much damage it takes, even Vita absorbing the power of its cores initially, it still cannot be fully destroyed. And I get that a part of it within Chapter 13's lore of why it can't be destroyed is that Al has fused with it a little bit in mind and in spirit and within the energy of the soul. They're essentially linked as of merging together within the rift so that Al can experience all of these phenomena and come to understand them without being completely disintegrated, as it's not meant for a mortal mind to comprehend on its own. All of this is to say that we are not nearly so done with exploring the full capabilities of the Ares, nor towards understanding exactly what the Ares is or its cores. And of course, so long as the Ares persists, especially as it continues to pull upon the power of the Conduit, upon the rift, upon the power of other universes, the ghosts will always give chase. So that again is why I fully believe ghosts will be prevalent in future Xenoblade entries, or at least perhaps a universal equivalent, or other forms or indicators that, hey, Xenoblade protagonists and antagonists and scientists, please stop trying to play God. It is not good. Alright, I digress. Again, for the third time this video, probably. I think that is where we are going to be calling it. Xenoblade Chronicles X has concluded, although a little bit too fast for my pacing preferences, especially when taking into consideration the absolute severity, the consequences in play when the ghosts become involved. And also, I just want to throw out really quickly, I feel like this also sort of hurts the concept or idea of how Elma knew that the Ganglion would arrive at Earth in about 30 years, and then how the ghosts would be there at the exact same time, because, you know, the ghosts respond to these sort of cosmic anomalies. Was perhaps the Ares in sort of downtime for 30 years? That's how they knew when the Ares started to pick up power that, you know, the Ganglion would be after them and the ghosts would appear at roughly the same time. I don't know. That part, I sort of see the wrench being thrown in there. Let's just focus on the larger narrative as a whole, which is we are in a brand new universe. We still have the Ares with us, aka we still have that cosmic power that comes from the rift through the conduits. So more than not, the ghosts will follow us. We still have some more giant cosmic lore to be handling. But with that being said, you know, we are in line for new entries, new universes, new stories to be told, especially with Klaus's saga coming to an end, and perhaps Xenoblade Chronicles X's universe and explanations serving as the new central focal point for the series going forward. With that being said, could we see some universes where there are some less cosmic sci-fi stakes at hand? Moving along, I am very keen to see. What would you all like to see, though, in the next Xenoblade entry? Would you prefer to see more of the sci-fi kick-ups? Would you like to see Skell's return in some new way, shape, or another? Or do you immediately want that new direct Xenoblade X sequel as we land on yet another uncharted territory in a brand new universe with still some old consequences to take in mind? Let me know all of your thoughts down below. Thank you very much for watching this video if you choose to stick by it. I hope that you all enjoyed this kind of rambling. Let me know if you'd like to see more like this, or if you prefer my other kinds of videos. I will get to those at some point. But with all that said, thank you all very much for choosing to listen. Again, if you like this video, please give it a like and consider sticking around. Let me know your thoughts down below. And as always, have a great day.